Hey, everybody, how's it going? Seth Williams here and Jaron Barnes, and you're listening to the RE Tipster podcast. And today we're talking about a deal that Jaron kind of got into about a year ago now. And it's a house hack. And this is a deal that I've actually wanted to talk with Jaron about on the podcast for a while because it's pretty cool, just the circumstances of how it came about and the numbers. And it's a really cool place. I haven't actually been there yet. It's still on my to-do list, but sounds like a really cool property. It's not his first house hack, but it just seemed like a really interesting case study for us to dive into a little bit, just to learn all about how he did it and how it's working out for him. And also over the past year, as he has been diving into this house hack deal and making it work, he's been putting together the next RE Tipster course called House Hacker University. And we've been spending many, many months now. Mostly he has been spending the time putting together the videos. I've basically just been reviewing him and saying, it's horrible, Jaron. Do it over again. Just kidding. I'm usually nicer than that. But we've been going back and forth and putting this course together. And I don't know, it felt like it was worth our while to dedicate a podcast episode, not only to talking about his house hacking experience, but also diving a little bit into the course and what that's going to be all about and what you can expect from that if you're somebody who is interested in house hacking. So, where do we start, Jaron? Where's the best place to start on this?
I think the best place for us to begin, Seth, is kind of giving the backstory as to why house hacking became a primary focus for me in the first place. So
Actually, you
I
know
was
what?
actually,
I know an even better place to start. Why don't we talk about what is house hacking for the few
okay,
people out there who might not even know what we're talking about?
yeah, I think that's a good place to start. So house hacking, the way I define it is it's a strategy where you offset your monthly housing costs, whether that's rent or a mortgage or what have you, by income generated from your primary residence. I think the most common means of house hacking is by owning a 2 to 4 unit and living in one and renting out the others. But there are other ways to generate revenue for your primary residence, like eh, um, renting out rooms to roommates, renting out a basement, Airbnb, doing short-term vacation rentals through something like Airbnb or Verbo. If you have like an in-law suite, or you have again a basement or even an attic or some other space that's not really being occupied in the house, you can figure out ways to generate income from it, and then you can use that income to offset your mortgage costs. Why I think the most common strategy is a 2 to 4 unit where you live in one and rent out the others is because, you can use, very low money down financing through, like an FHA loan or other options out there, and put very little money out of pocket and still get great financing because anything under 5 units is perceived as a residential property in the lending world. So you can get into a deal very inexpensively, and then you can have tenants or other means to offset your costs. And if you play your cards right, you actually could live mortgage free. Well, I mean, it's not technically mortgage free. It's just you don't pay anything out of pocket because your income is large enough to cover everything. So that's kind of the gist of house hacking.
Yeah. Yeah. And house hacking, I mean, the concept is nothing new. This is something people have been doing for probably centuries, but the term house hacking was coined by Brandon Turner at Bigger Pockets a number of years ago, and that's kind of caught on. That's like what people call it now. And they've obviously got tons of great information on it as well. Um, Maybe just talking about the specifics of your deal, is it worth even diving into the first house hack you did, or should we just skip over that, you think?
I mean, I think we can dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
It was interesting because it I got it through land contract and I got it through a direct mail campaign. So that was, there's an interesting element of that. But we should probably focus primarily on the one that I'm in now because this is like my dream house and really awesome. The other one was like 950 square feet and kind of
Yeah.
a
Well,
lot to
it was more of a
sacrifice
stepping
for.
stone. This is more of like a permanent place you
More
want to
long
stay
term.
in.
I
Yeah.
don't really plan on selling this property. I really like this property. So
Yeah. Well, let's dive into that then. So, how'd you find this one? Was this direct mail too, or did you find this somewhere else?
yeah, so this one, I was living in the duplex that I was in a land contract on, and we had we had our first child, who was kind of becoming a toddler, and my mother-in-law lived with me, my sister-in-law lived with me. It was me and my wife, and it was like 950 square feet, and just was not enough space. So me and my wife were just aware that we had to figure something out, and we were actually, I don't know if we knew we were pregnant yet with our second, or I think we were, and we were just starting to talk about like, hey, we really now, the rubber needs to meet the road. We need to figure out what we're gonna do. And I think the land contract was actually like coming due, where we either had to figure something out, or like refinance and pay off the guy or something. So, my wife and I were in a spot where, in the beginning of 2020, we were. I went to a meetup in Chicago, and I reached out to some guys that I have a reputation of specializing in house hacking, like properties for house hacking, and they connected me with the lender. I got pre-approved, and then I forgot exactly what went down, but we ended up holding off on wanting to move to a suburb of Chicago. We actually originally wanted to move closer to Oak Park, because that's where our church is at, and it's quite a bit of a drive from Munster, Indiana, where I live at here in in northwest suburb of Chicago. It's kind of weird. People sometimes don't understand like how does this all work, but Chicago is actually the local like metropolitan area. I just happen to live on an Indiana side. So if you on a particular highway going south from Chicago, I'm one exit into Indiana. So I could turn one corner and I'm 4 minutes from Illinois. So I live right on the border. So all that being said, I got pre-approved, I got all set up, and then I held off on it for a couple months, and then COVID hit, and it was like, oh no, and it was like right there in the beginning when all the lockdowns were in full effect, and we're all sitting there like, is my land business gonna be okay? Is our tipster gonna? Is everything gonna be fine? And everyone is freaking out. And I remember I was sitting downstairs. My wife was upstairs, and all of a sudden, I heard her start screaming, and I'm like, "What the heck's going on?" She came down all excited, and she said, "Babe, I found our like our triplex. I found our triplex," and it was literally around the corner. So like, it's hard to describe, but I'm a few blocks down, but you just pretty much go down the street of our duplex, and then you turn right, and you go down like maybe 4 blocks, and here's the triplex. And I went there, and I didn't know if I was gonna be able to get approved, and like I didn't know what my financial situation was at, because I was a little bit scared with COVID, and I didn't really want to use my land business, because I wasn't sure how stable the income was going to be going into COVID-19. But we ended up walking through this property. My wife loved it. I loved it too. I mean, it looks like a castle from the outside, and it turned out that I was able to use the pre-approval letter from like the January February time, use the same lender, and this particular lender got me an FHA loan, but the way things were, and I don't fully understand how this all works, but he's able to give structure the loan where there's a credit at the end of at closing table, where you can offset your down payment even further. So we bought the property for like 285, and there was like, so 3.5% of that, it's closer to like 12,000. I'm just shooting off the top of my head. I don't know if that's the exact amount, but it's somewhere around there. But after he did all of his things on his end, at closing, I only had to bring $2,600 and 18, all right, $2,618 and some change. And that was awesome
That's a
because
really
I was,
low down payment for that kind of, I mean, even with
yeah.
the FHA, I mean, did you ever get to the bottom of like how that was possible? Like what exactly happened?
Yeah, so I sent him an email in preparation of the House Hacker University to ask him what he did, and essentially he structures like a buyer's credit, and there has to be like, I think the seller has to agree to it, but um there has like somehow they they took a credit out of the loan, I think is how it went down. And don't hold me to this, because I don't fully like this stuff's above my pay grade, and I'm not a lender. I don't really understand how it all works, but um he works with a lot of house hackers and he does it all the time, and it's totally legitimate. And it was awesome. And that's the power of working with a creative lender that knows what he's doing, because that was it changed I mean it I was also kind of freaking out too, because I actually didn't know the down payment amount the entire time we were closing, and I kept asking, "Hey, how much am I gonna have to bring to closing? Hey, how much?" Like over and over again, and I didn't know until the day before closing. And then I saw the dollar amount and I was like, that can't be right. So I called my agent, called the title company, and called the lender and said, "Is this right?" And they're like, "Yep, yep, yep." So it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, and remind me, you had, or was this your first FHA loan?
Yes, it was.
I thought I remember back when we were talking about this. Wasn't that a question like that was a maybe a finding how like you're not limited to only using the FHA loan one time. Like it's it's a first time home buyer's loan, but you don't necessarily always have to be a first time home buyer or something like that. Isn't that a nuance that a lot of people don't know about?
That used to be a standard where FHA could only be used once for as a first-time home buyer, but then they've over the years changed that requirement. So there are really strict requirements around the FHA loan. Um, uh, like they don't want you to have one FHA loan and then tomorrow go buy another property with another FHA loan. But if you've owned the property for at least a year, the requirement is that you have to live at the property for at least a year, and the next property needs to be 100 miles away from the current property. It's either 50 or 100. I forget now. It's in the House Hacker University though. And so, like you have to live far away, or as a caveat to that, you can justify the move. So if you have a life changing circumstance, like you get a new job, or you have a child, or your in-laws come and move in, you need to be able to justify it and get it approved by FHA to move forward. So there are some workarounds and some things that you can do. But what I'm curious about, I'm wondering if I like, because I'm a real estate investor and I just happen to follow the trends of market growth. If every 2 years or every year or whatever I move to, let's say, Florida and then Texas and then Colorado, can I like perpetually have like a huge amount of FHA loans? Because if I can, then I can like every year to 2 years like move and justify moving, because I'm a real estate investor. I need to go where the getting is getting good.
Yeah.
So curious if
Yeah.
that's actually something you can do.
Yeah, and this is this stuff about using an FHA loan or a VA loan if you're a veteran, that kind of thing. A lot of people who are interested in house hacking, part of the reason why, I don't want to speak for everybody, but a lot of people is because they're not like mega rich. They don't have a ton of money, or they're at least very budget conscious, or they want to build wealth in a way that somebody else is doing it for them. And a standard conventional loan, you got to put down like 20% of or 25% of the property's value, which is a lot. And using an FHA loan, only putting down 3.5%, or in your case, even less, I mean, that is a huge advantage. And that can, and ultimately the payment, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but like it's a much less significant issue because your tenant or tenants are paying for it. Um, so it just the whole FHA loan thing works really well with the house hacking strategy, and that's what you used. And I know you talk about it in the course quite a bit as well.
Yeah, and I do want to address something. A lot of people think that with house hacking, you have to have a house where you're getting the mortgage 100% covered by the tenants. And that's not necessarily true. There are circumstances where it makes sense for you to pay a little bit out of pocket. If you wanted to live in an expensive area that was in high demand, offsetting your mortgage can be just as powerful as being mortgage free. Like if you only had to spend $500 a month on your mortgage, like that's a win. That's awesome. That's a good thing. So if your objective is to live 100% mortgage free, you might have to be in a situation where you're on a less desirable side of town or further away from things that you enjoy. But if you're willing to pay a little bit, you can live in a great area and it's a lot more feasible. There's much more options through house hacking where you're paying like let's say $500 a month than there is absolutely being 100% mortgage free. Now, exceptions do exist. You can definitely have your cake and eat it too, but you might need to do a little bit more research and a little bit more searching to find that perfect situation. And for me right now, I am paying about $700 out of pocket for my mortgage.
Actually,
That's even
maybe before you go there, why don't
yeah.
we just why don't we take it from the top? What is your normal mortgage payment? Like mortgage plus escrow plus insurance plus all that stuff.
It's
Um,
roughly 23, $2,400.
okay, and you're paying about 700 bucks of that amount?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. So I have one tenant that pays $700 and then one tenant that pays 975. So total that hold on. I wrote down the number. So total that's $1,675 that I'm getting in rental income. But what's really cool about my property is that my tax assessed value was like 365,000 and I bought it for 285. So right now actually I have it on my list to reach out to the tax assessor and say, "Hey, I need to appeal this because I bought this at 285 and I got appraised for 285. So why is my taxes assessed at 365?" So that's going to adjust my property taxes, which is also was going to decrease how much that I have to pay on a monthly basis. And then second to that, Indiana has something called the homestead exemption, where if it's your primary residence, you get a discount on your property taxes. If you have a rental property, it's
I think
more.
most states have that kind of thing.
Yeah, so for my primary residence, just that alone is gonna. I actually went a few months back and got kind of like an estimate of how much that's gonna change my taxes, and it's about half. So
Yeah.
between the two of them, I might be in a situation where I'm actually paying nothing out of pocket for this property. If worst case, it's probably gonna be like $100 to $200 somewhere around there.
And did you uh did you end up increasing rent for the tenants? Actually, maybe just the tenant discussion in general. So,
Yeah.
were there tenants there already when you moved in? Did you have to kick anybody out? Did you change rent? Did you have any awkward conversations? Like, what has it been like managing tenants who are sharing a wall or a floor or a ceiling with you?
Yeah, so there was one of the tenants was here. She's been here 19 years and she's lived through three owners, which is really she knows more about this property than even the seller did. She's been a wealth of information and is a really sweet lady, single lady, and yeah, she's awesome. I did end up raising her rent a little bit. She is not on a lease. She requested that she remains month to month. Which I mean, she was so helpful and she's to be honest, she's a pretty amazing tenant and like I never hear any complaints from her. Like she's always been really helpful and those are kind of hard to come by. Most likely if she's been here that long, she's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, it's a
So
good sign.
I raised her rent I think $50 a month and I might raise it every year or every 2 years or something, just say, "Hey, we got to stay on pace with inflation or what have you." I could rent her property for at least 850. Um, so I am giving her a discount, but it's because I mean, for one, if she moves out, I have to like renovate her, I have to do paint and I have to do, some basic touch ups before I can release it, right? So I don't have to deal with any of that and I get $700 a month. And then the other one, I'm getting 975, so it's slightly bigger, and that one is it's pretty solid. So I that it's funny you asked if I had to kick anybody out. The first person that I rented that property to didn't end up working out.
You mean
Not
the
really on.
950 unit? Is that what you
Yep.
mean? Okay.
Yep. So I listed it on apartments.com, vetted them, did a background check and everything, but he ended up losing his job. And he actually got into a massive car accident. Which was, I mean, he was like walking on crutches. It was really sad to see.
Oh man.
But he pretty much just texted me one day. He's like, "Jaron, I lost my job. I don't know when I'm going to be able to work again. I'm not going to be able to stay here." And I mean, I could have been a jerk and be like, "Nope, you have a lease, buddy." Blah blah blah. But why would I do that? I just say, "Yeah, man, go for it," and I'll just relist it. So, and he was a little bit more troublesome. Um, a couple times, like I have a smoking policy, like no smoking policy in the in my property, and there's a couple times I caught him smoking and some other things, and there's some weirdness. So I'm kind of glad that that worked out that way because the current tenant is again just no problems, like just really easy to
Yeah.
work with. I barely see him, and it's awesome.
What is that like? Because this is something that, I mean, hopefully you just luck out and get awesome tenants and you never have any awkward confrontations. But how does that work when you do have to have an awkward confrontation and they're living right there? Or what if you happen to get a tenant that you don't realize is a psycho until they're there and like your family's right there, you know? Like, I don't know, did you ever worry about, I mean, this is my fear mentality kicking in, but do you ever worry about like safety or I don't know, is that ever a weird thing for you?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely something that you have to have in the back of your mind. So I think it's good to have some clear separation between you and your tenants. Something that we teach in House Hacker University is there's a difference between being friendly and being friends. I don't think you should ever be friends with your tenants. Like you should not be grilling and hanging out or any of that because you need to reserve enough separation where if you have that if you need to have that awkward conversation you can. Whereas if you start entering into the friend zone, it just a lot more complicated because now you have relational capital that they can leverage, right? So I do think that it's important to keep things separate. The way the property is designed too, uh, we don't have any common areas, so they have a separate entrance on both the front and the back. Technically, I do walk through their side from my garage because I have a garage and they have a garage, but their garage is a detached garage in the backyard. So I rarely see them. I do hear them occasionally, like it's something that you're gonna just have to live with. It's kind of like living in an apartment. Like I'll hear footsteps and sometimes I might, see them outside and I just say, "Hey, how's it going?" And if they need something, if something breaks or I actually just found out that I have squirrels in my attic, so I have to get like my dad is in the south and he called him a critter getter, so I have to find a critter getter to remove squirrels from the attic. But yeah, I mean, it's by and large not that big of a deal. I do think that when on the vetting side, that's when you need to really put your due diligence hat on and call prior references, call prior landlords, make sure that um, interview them, try to get a gauge of who they are very, very clearly before you rent to them because this is your family. Now, one of the things that is nice about house hacking, there are you as because this is your primary residence, a lot of the fair housing laws aren't as applicable or as applicable to you because as your primary residence you have more say in who you can rent to and the rules that you want to have in your house. Like I don't want cigarettes and marijuana smoke around my kids, so I would like I put it right there in the lease, no smoking. And if you're going to be smoking, smoke outside. And I don't know 100% if this was just like a normal rental property, if I'd have the ability to tell them they can't smoke in their own place. I don't know. I think that it depends on what state you're in and what have you. But there are a lot of the fair housing requirements of not discriminating against. And obviously, we're not encouraging anybody to discriminate anybody, but this is your home, so you do have a lot more control of who you rent to, which is nice. So it is still a risk, though. I mean, you could hire like, and if you were really concerned with it, you could do on a new tenant a shorter lease and say, "Hey, I'm gonna do a 3 month lease or a 6 month lease," and we can check in and see how it goes. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's the best case scenario and what most likely things will turn out is they live their life, me and my family live mine. We're neighbors and we might say hi to each other and that's about it. So it's actually not that bad, but it can be, and that's something that you have to be aware of and put the right things in place to ensure you don't get into a bad situation.
Okay, so when it comes to managing these tenants, like collecting payments and screening them and getting leases signed and all that stuff, are you using a special software for that, or are you doing it manually, or how are you handling that aspect of it?
Yeah, so for me I'm using apartments.com for pretty much everything. Apartments.com is free. And if you have ever heard of a cozy.co, that was a pretty popular management system for smaller landlords or kind of mom and pop landlords. And they just bought Cozy and they're kind of like building their own version within apartments.com. And it's pretty cool. I mean, I'm able to list properties. I'm able to screen tenants, process applications, look at background checks, and they handle all of that within the back end of apartments.com. So that's been kind of my go-to. I could do further stuff, like I could process payments if I wanted to and collect rents through it. I don't, just because my tenants are not as tech savvy and it's easier for them to just write me a check. But because I live so close, it's pretty cool. Like they just put a check in my mailbox, and normally even before rent is due, I have rent for the next month. So it's really streamlined that way. In terms of like managing, service requests or stuff, they just text me if something's wrong. I did find out that I have squirrels in my attic right now. Which is not fun, but I have to go and handle that. And I think the only other time I've ever had any real issues is one of the tenant that's been here like 19 years. She had her sink clogged once, and all I had to do is like unscrew the little nozzle and just clear it out, and then it worked again. And then her stove was really old, and like I didn't. It was almost like inhumane for her to have that stuff. And then I think she was like down to one burner, and she didn't tell me about it because it was, she lived here for years with that thing before I was here, and then her burner stopped, and then so I just ended up getting her a new stove. And so there will be things like that that do come up, and that is one of the biggest drawbacks of house hacking, is that you have um maintenance costs for sure that you're going to have to take into account. It's not a matter of if something's going to break down, it's a matter of when, because I have 3 units. I live in one, but that means I have 3 times the amount of things that can go wrong and break down. So,
And like when it comes to like lawn care and that kind of stuff, are you like mowing the lawn yourself, or are you hiring people to do any of this stuff, or like how big of a hassle is this maintenance thing? I've never been a property manager myself. Like I want nothing to do with that, and I don't know that you're necessarily forced to do that, but like it does make sense for you to do that because you're right there and it's not a huge job. But like, has it been much of an inconvenience on your life in any way, or not so
well,
much?
not me, because like I really understand the the power and benefit of staying in your lane and doubling down on your strengths. And I'm not a mechanical oriented person at all. And I've tested it out. I really have. Like when with this particular house, actually, there was a kind of some renovations that we did on the unit that we're in, and I was very hands on and very involved. And um through months of being involved in all that, I came to the conclusion that, yep, I was right the whole time. I really shouldn't be doing this stuff. Because you think about it, as like talk about mowing the lawn. I pay somebody to mow the lawn because let's say it takes, I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour to mow the lawn. And you have to do that once a week, once every 2 weeks. Let's say it's 4 hours a month. In that 4 hours, if I was calling back sellers, or I was, building content at RA Tipster, would it be more value, more fulfilling, and ultimately make me more money? And the answer is yeah. With what my skill set is, I would be better off. I'd be adding more value to the world and to myself, doing other things and mowing my lawn. So, it cost me $25 a mow. Um, and I think that you have to search around. Like we actually talk about in House Hacker University, there's kind of a two-tier pricing system when it comes to construction costs and labor costs and things of that sort. There's kind of like the premium version, which is kind of a ripoff, and then it's like there's a price where people who are familiar with contracting and the whole like world of hiring maintenance type work, that there's a cheaper price that like a contractor would pay another contractor for. And so you look around, and I mean, I could have been paying $60 a mow, but I'm paying 25 to a guy who just has. He's a young guy in his 20s, and he's a really nice kid. Does landscaping, and he actually I there's a 6 unit right next door to my property, and he did the maintenance for them. So I just said, hey, how much do you charge? Da 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 da. So I'm paying 25 bucks a mow, and he comes every 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
it's pretty seamless. So.
Yeah. When it comes to like renovations and stuff, so how good or bad a shape was this property in? And 'cause I know you did some, changes. Was it just to your unit that you're living in that you made these changes to, or was it the other units? And were those like necessity changes, or were they just kind of like, yeah, I just want it to be nicer, so I'm gonna make it better?
Yeah, so it was definitely more of I just want it to be nicer, so we're gonna make it better. We did do a little bit more stuff in the 975 unit, so we replaced some of the flooring with the flooring that we have in our property, and we did some work in the bathroom. The shower had some like water pressure issues, so we got that looked at and fixed, um, and all of that. So I mean, it was not crazy. And then we painted, I mean, that's just to get a new fresh coat of paint, and that was pretty much it on the other unit. But in ours, because this is quasi a permanent spot, like we're approaching it as though we could live here forever. I don't know if we will, but we're approaching this property as this could be our long-term place, or one of at least the next few years. So my wife has been really patient with me and has put up with a lot of kitchens that she did not like. And so this one, she's like, I'm getting my kitchen, and it made it really, really clear. So
Yeah.
we removed a wall, and we added a second bathroom. So where the sink sits in the second bathroom was where the kitchen originally sat, and so we moved the kitchen a little bit further. We completely redid the flooring, and then renovated the second or the first bathroom as well. So we did quite a bit of work on it, but we didn't have to. Like, it was definitely move-in ready. And if we were, I mean, the kitchen was a little funky. It had like checkered tile, and it was all red and weird. But in terms of, could I have just sucked it up and lived with it without paying a dollar in renovation? Absolutely. Another thing too was this office. I'm actually sitting in an office right now that didn't exist. It was just raw basement. So adding the things that we've always wanted in a house was important to us, but it was more of a choice. It wasn't like we needed to do it.
Yeah. Your office is pretty sweet too. It's like way nicer than mine. It's like twice the size and it's pretty cool. So I haven't actually seen it with my own eyes, but I've gotten the FaceTime virtual tour of it. Looks pretty cool, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's definitely my dream house so far. Like, even from my childhood, this is my favorite house that I've ever lived in. Just because it has a lot of character and a lot of space. And even if, I mean, if we were to stay long term, we could fence in the backyard and have even further separation from the tenants, because there's a path where I could like give them a yard and have us have a yard, and they would have a clear pathway to their garage, and my kid could play in the background or in the backyard, and then we could finish the basement too. So, and there's even a spot where if I wanted to get crazy and add a fourth unit, I could over my garage. So there's a lot that I of further potential here that we could do if we really wanted. And it's just exciting to come home. Like, it's weird. It's for a long time I was like, oh, I always want to leave, and every day at some point I wanted to just get out of the house because I was cramped, and I didn't know that there was a situation where I could just love being in my house and being a recluse.
Yeah, I know, man. I remember my first house. In some ways, it kind of reminded me of your previous duplex, just in terms of the size. My first house was like 900 square feet. It had a horribly leaky basement, and it kind of just drains on you when there's just like, I don't know, the layout is weird and you don't love being there. And it's just got problems everywhere you look. And when you move into a step or two up, and it's just nice. It's a pretty big, just like mentally, it helps out a lot.
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing I just wanted to reiterate, I know we kind of touched on it earlier, but so some people get into house hacking because they want to have zero housing costs, but a lot of people use it just because it enables them to live in a more expensive market or neighborhood that they otherwise would never be able to afford. And that equity is built on somebody else's dime for the most part. So it's kind of thing where I know your market where you're at, Jaron, and the one that I'm at, neither one of these markets are like super pricey, ridiculously expensive ones, but I know there's plenty of big cities out there where it's just hard to own a home because it just costs so much. And this can be one way to bridge that gap and make it more feasible.
Yeah, 100%. If you wanted to live in like the San Francisco Bay Area, or you wanted to live in, New York, or, somewhere that was much harder to afford, I, you have to run the numbers and have it make sense, but it would, it would be way better to have, extra income, because in a lot of those markets, like, rent can be super expensive too. So if you can get great rent, and and really offset your mortgage costs, even if if you're in the Bay Area and you're paying a 900 or $1,000 a month, for some people that's like unheard of, and that's unreal, and that could be a really big win, because not only are you just paying 1,000, but over time your mortgage is getting paid for, so your equity is growing on somebody else's dime. That means that when you sell it, that's the money that you're actually going to walk away with at closing, between how much you owe on your mortgage and how much you can actually sell your property for. So
Yeah.
that's a big deal, because it's like you're not doing anything and you're just waiting, owning a property, paying your normal, quasi cheap or even very cheap mortgage costs. And then when you sell, it's like, oh snap, I actually am going to make a lot of money on this property. It's pretty
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah. And the reason that house hacking is always done with like a 2 to 4 unit, like why couldn't a person do this with like a 100 unit apartment building? Is it because of the FHA loan requirement? Is that the main thing? Or
Well, it depends. I mean, you can do that. It's just, if you go above 5 units, you're gonna have to use commercial financing, and commercial financing requires a higher down payment. I think it's around 30% typically. I mean, I think some loans do exist out there for like 25%, but it's, if I remember correctly, it's somewhere between like 25 and 35% down,
yeah.
which
So it kind
is.
of just kicks you into a totally different ballgame in terms of how much money you need to have to work with and the management process and all that.
Yeah, and I think you have a little bit of the laws of diminishing returns coming into effect, because even if you are living for free on a monthly basis, if you spent 100 grand or more in order to get into the property, like, you could probably spend that 100 grand elsewhere. Now, 100 units is still 100 units and probably has other benefits besides just, house hacking. But if we're just looking to offset your mortgage, I mean, you can own a house outright for 100 grand. So.
Yeah. Yeah, gotcha. You want to dive into the course a little bit, just in terms of what that's all about, like what a person could expect if they're interested in checking out that particular course and learning more about house hacking and how you're able to do it and a lot of the tips and tricks you've learned along the way. Like, what does a person get with this kind of course?
Yeah, so I think the main objective of our course is to get you from not being a house hacker to being a house hacker. So it gives you everything that you need, from how to find a property, how to underwrite a property, how to finance a property, how to manage tenants. It kind of gives you A through Z on everything you need in order to become a house hacker. For the strategy of buying a 2 to 4 unit and living in one and renting out the others. We do have some bonus modules in there about, the alternative ways to house hack, like renting through roommates or Airbnb. But the bulk of the content is everything that you need in order to become a house hacker. So pretty much like this whole start of the course was, I just stepped into an incredible housing situation, and I was like, the world needs to know about this. And a lot of the resources that are out there, there's some books and there's some podcasts and some articles that are helpful, but there's nothing that I've found that's systematically like, hey, you can get a house this way, this way, this way, or this way. And if you do these things, here's, the pros and cons, and here's like the step-by-step ways to go about it. Here's everything you need to know about financing. Here's how you find an investor friendly lender and how you vet them. There wasn't kind of that systematic approach. And so I realized, hey, we really need to provide this value. through, at least to our favorite people in the world, the RE Tipster community. So that's what kind of inspired the whole thing, and that's what you get out of the course is it's an A through Z process to get you to becoming a house hacker.
Yeah. Yeah. And, if anybody listening out there, if you've ever been through an RE Tipster course or just read our blog post and that kind of thing, you know that we don't really mess around. Like if we're going to make a course, it's going to be good. It's going to be very comprehensive and thorough. And that's really what this is. I several different sets of eyes have been on this. We've gotten feedback from a lot of different people, from different beta testers and that kind of thing. So if you're interested in this strategy, like this is the thing that's going to help you get there. And I'm curious, Jaron, like I look at your situation, obviously it's working out very well. Part of me wonders, like, did you just get lucky or is this something that anybody could replicate?
It's 100% something that can be replicated. I don't know if you're gonna be able to pay $2,600 out of pocket for a property, but definitely within 10 grand, 5 to 10 grand out of pocket. 100% you can repeat this until the cows come home.
And that
In
does sort of depend on the property you get and how much that costs in the first place. It's kind of a multiple of that, but
Right, and in the market too and all that stuff, but, I live in a really awesome area. There's a lot of doctors here, like, it's kind of, in the Northwest, Indiana region, it's more kinda, the upscale A-class neighborhood kind of, and, I'm 45 minutes from downtown Chicago, so if I wanna do anything, it's all within an hour drive, and it's a pretty cool situation, I do think that you got to get super clear on what you want, because if you just kind of stumble into something kind of ambiguous of, oh, like I kind of sort of want to live mortgage free, that's like my priority, but I kind of want to go over here and like I love these areas, and you don't really know clearly what you want, you're gonna, I think, struggle. But if you really do the appropriate soul searching and get it locked down on what's important to you and your family, you can go and find a house hack situation that will get you there.
yeah. And in terms of the stuff that is covered in the course, should we just like run through the quick like
Yeah.
table of contents of what each module includes?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
So, module one, we've got house hacking fundamentals. What kind of stuff do you talk about in that first module?
Yeah. So we pretty much just cover the ins and outs of what house hacking is and why ultimately it's the best form of housing. Now, I say that with a grain of salt because it all depends on kind of what you want in your lifestyle, right? If we talk purely financial, though, house hacking is the best option compared to renting or owning a single family home because you're building equity and you're reducing your costs or eliminating your monthly costs for housing, and that's really hard to beat from an ROI standpoint. Um, and then we also cover kind of what the cons are to just be aware of, because with everything in life there's pros and cons, and with house hacking there are some pitfalls that you need to be aware of, and do some things to av- you know avoid those pitfalls. So that's
Yeah,
kind of what we cover in the first module there.
gotcha. And then module two is all about finding a property. So, what's
Mhm.
that all about?
Yeah, so I mean, whether it's through using an investor friendly real estate agent and how to find one and vet one, whether it's through wholesalers or direct mail or finding things through online directories, there we cover the primary ways to find a property for house hacking, and then what you want to do in each one of those situations. Because like if you buy a property from a wholesaler, for example, most likely the property is going to need more work than if you found one through a real estate agent. So you have to kind of navigate the waters between the two differently. So we kind of go through all the ins and outs of
Yeah,
each option.
for sure. And then module three is all about running the numbers and managing rehab costs if you're doing any rehab. And I know this is like, I mean, all these modules are obviously important, but this one's pretty huge just because your numbers and your assumptions determine everything and whether you even know what you're doing in terms of how to look at, the different variable costs and all that. But like, what are all the ins and outs of what you cover in this one?
Yeah, so in this one we cover due diligence. So like what goes into um, like running due diligence on a property that you're considering as a primary residence. We talk about how to run the numbers of, identifying how much your monthly mortgage payment is actually going to cost before you have a loan in place. And then we also show you how to run comps on rents because it's a little bit different than houses. It's pretty much the same high level principle, but the data is different because we're obviously dealing with rental income instead of or like rental costs instead of housing costs, right? So we go through how to do that, and then essentially as a house hacker, you need to figure out how much am I obligated to pay in terms of a mortgage, and then how much rent can I get for a property, and am I okay with the outcome of this particular house? So like if this house can produce, $2,000 a month in rental income, but it costs 2,400 and I'm out of pocket $400, am I okay with that? Am I not okay with that based on my goals? So that's really the biggest thing. And then the last lesson is about managing construction projects because uh, contractors can be a big pain point if you don't know how to manage them. And unfortunately, it's pretty typical for contractors to be willing to rip you off and take all the money that they can get from you and not feel bad about it. So there's some things that um, just some good best practices that we put there for managing contractors.
Yeah. And then we got a whole module all about the financing aspect of it, right? Which is super important. That's a big part of why this works as a strategy for a lot of people. Um, Anything
Yeah.
specific to talk about there, or just is that pretty
Yeah, I
much?
mean, we did talk about like four different low money down options in the conventional financing world. We do talk about seller financing because I did before this triplex, I did get a duplex that I lived for I think a year and a half or 2 years on land contract that I got through direct mail. So you definitely can house hack through seller financing. Um, and then we also talk about how to find an investor friendly lender and how to vet lenders to know that they're actually investor friendly. So we try to get you everything that you need in order to get a great financing situation because that also is a huge leverage point because if you get a great loan that can offset your down payment like mine, or it can also affect how much it's going to cost on a monthly basis. So that's a huge piece.
And then the final module in the course is all about managing the property, which is, I know we kind of covered a little bit of that in our conversation here, but um, yeah, what are the ins and outs of what you talk about in that one?
Yeah, so I just kind of give a lot of principles and rules of thumb on what to do with managing tenants that live next to you or share a roof with you because there is some waters that you have to navigate properly. And there are some things that you're responsible for and that you have to be aware of and have the right systems in place and have the right um, boundaries and all of that. So we cover kind of what I've dubbed my best advice on tenant management, and then also go in depth on apartments.com if you wanted to use them as your software to manage tenants.
For sure. And then we got three bonuses in this, which I actually thought these are really cool and a lot of value tied up in these. First one is an interview with Ben Leibovich about using your house as sort of a short-term rental, kind of like the Airbnb approach. So it's a little bit different than what Jaron is doing, but it's just another way to use your house to make money and supplement some or all of your housing payment. And we've also got one with Lucas Hall because he talks about leveraging the power of having roommates, like renting out rooms to people. So you don't necessarily have to have an accessory building or a whole separate unit, but just, if you got a bedroom, you can make money from that. And then the
Yep.
last interview was with Scott Trench of Bigger Pockets. What do you guys talk about in that one?
So we just talk about what his experience was with house hacking. I think he owns like a 4 unit in Denver and he lives in one, and he's at the time of the interview at least he had been living there for several years, and I was picking his brain about it. I that was actually at the time when I was still in Chicago and where all of this kind of started. I was really trying to figure out how to cut costs, and I had an epiphany where I realized my biggest monthly expense was rent. And I was like, huh, if I could eliminate that or drastically reduce that, then all of a sudden it's going to be like I've leveled up my life, or I've almost given myself a raise. And, I had a lot of hesitation around, similar to what you brought up about, sharing a roof with tenants. Like, what if I or I lease out to a psychopath or something? And Scott Trench was kind of that interview was kind of a turning point for me. Where I was like, oh, okay, like that it's not irrational, like it's something that you need to be aware of, but it's a more often than not, it's going to be just like if you were to rent an apartment somewhere, you just
Yeah.
have neighbors and it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, totally. And Scott and Lucas and Ben, each of those guys are experts in this stuff and have a ton of knowledge. I know Scott's got a whole book about it. Ben, I think he's got a book too. I don't think Lucas has a
Yeah,
book,
he
but he's
does.
been doing this for a long time. So a lot of additional supplemental knowledge if you wanted to go kind of down a different path in terms of house hacking. So yeah, it's been one of the latest big efforts we've made at RE Tipster, and you can check it out at househackeruniversity.com, and that'll be out there for anybody who's interested in that. But yeah, man, anything else we should cover before we wrap this up?
No, I hope for our audience out there, for people who need this. I wish that this resource existed for me when I first got started in real estate and when I first started exploring this stuff, because it would have saved me a lot of time and trouble. So I really hope that this serves you well. We worked really, really hard on it. Lots of late nights, lots of sleepless nights, editing videos and putting it together. So
Yeah, man, I agree. I remember back in 2005 was the first time I was just finishing up college, and I was seriously wanting to do this. And house hacking wasn't a term back then, but it's basically what I wanted to do. And man, there were just so many unknowns. I really had no idea what I was doing, and there was no guidebook on it back then. It was just kind of figure it out. So yeah, this is if anybody out there is interested in this, I think you're gonna find it immensely helpful, and I hope it serves you well if you decide to jump in. So if you want to see the show notes for today's episode, you can check it out at retipster.com/103, because this is episode 103. And if you're listening to this on your phone, take out your phone, text the word free, FREE, to the number 33777. And something really cool will happen. You'll see. Just trust me. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you guys later.